this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. A few jobs to do in the kitchen, so kitchen time. And the first job is this plant. This is Dendrobium findlayanum, and it has come to pass that there are large keikis and they need to come off. Now I don't believe I've ever filmed taking keikis off a plant before, but it's not exactly difficult. But I will say they're not all coming off because they're not all ready. This one is. Where's the camera? Okay. So the criteria for me are open leaves and a root system that looks good enough to support the plant. Now that will be the plant. At the moment that will be sucking some goodness out of the mother plant. That's another problem I need to deal with. But they just come off. They just detach. You can twist them, you can bend them one way and then the other, but they should come off relatively easily, like that. Now some people would put a little bit of cinnamon on there. I've never bothered. So that's one. Let's see if we've got some of the others. As I said, these are not all ready to come off, but a lot of them are. This one is. That's got 4 good strong roots on it, and is actually growing quite well. So just give them a twist and a tug, bend them one way, then bend them the other, and they will just come off, intact, preferably. What else have we got? Yeah, that one could come off, and it's got 3 good roots. That's a younger one. That's 3. What else we got? See, this one here, although it's grown quite large, it only has a single root, so I'm going to leave that one. This one here has only got 2 roots, so I'm going to leave that one. This one has got 5 roots, so that's more than capable of looking after itself. You need to go careful when you do this because it is quite easy. The pressure you use to twist, it's quite easy to snap the roots. So go careful. It's not just a brute force job, it's gentle. And this one is more than ready to come off. Open leaves and again that's got 5 roots. So taking care not to force the roots away. It's the plant you're trying to take off. Stubborn, give it an extra twist. If you want, you can get a pair of scissors in there and cut them, but I've never found it necessary. I've always found they twist off okay. See, now that one has come off with quite a chunk of pseudo bulb, yeah? So that one I am going to trim. I don't want all that fleshiness around the base, simply because it will only rot. So there we go, that's that one. And because of that large chunk that's come out of that pseudo bulb, I'm going to put a spot of cinnamon on that. Again, I don't want any rot setting in, this, you know, just for the sake of a dab. It's only on that one because that one did tear a great chunk out, as you can see, so I'm just going to dab that one. That'll just dry it off. It'll leave a brown patch on that pseudo bulb, but I'd rather a brown dry patch than a brown soggy wet patch. Don't want wet patches. Right, so that's that done. So that's the keikis themselves. Right, I'll put that to one side because I haven't finished with that yet. And as I said, the rest of the keikis haven't got enough roots in my opinion. They would probably do okay, but if you take them off the plant too soon, they will stall, and then they can take quite a while to get going again. Now what we've got now is a nice bunch of keikis with a nice little set of roots. So I'll be back. Right, and all I'm going to do with these is stand them in a glass. Now this is where you have to be careful because these roots are quite brittle, because don't forget they've been in the air. Although I've poured some water on them every now and again, that's all they've had. These will spread out, but what I want to do is make sure that each keiki has some root tips at the bottom of that glass. And then all I'm going to do is pour some RO water in there. Not a lot. I don't want the whole plant standing in the water. What I want is some of the root tips of each one touching the water. And I'll adjust the plant to achieve that rather than make the water deeper. They just need to touch, and it doesn't need all of them to touch, just some of them. And that's about it, I think. Yeah, you're being a nuisance, aren't you? It's because it's got one really long root and the others are quite short. But each plant now has at least one or two root tips in the water. All I'll do with these is keep my eye on the water level and make sure it doesn't dry up, because obviously, you know, these are going to go in the house, these are not going out in the grow room. I need to watch them, yeah? And I also need them out of the bright light. I don't want these trying to grow like mad when they've lost the support of the mother plant now. So the only hydration they're going to get now is from these root tips. And eventually, probably about a week, maybe a week and a half, the roots will start acclimatizing to having at least part of them hydrated naturally, i.e. with water rather than from the air, and they will start to make the transition to normal roots. I could just pot these and they would probably grow fine, but I've always found that by acclimatizing these roots in this way first, for a while, the root tips get going a lot quicker when you suddenly dunk them in media. It's quite a dramatic change, isn't it, if you think about it. So after a while I'll top this water up, and I will slowly but surely get it a little bit deeper, so that more root tips are in it and more of the actual roots that are touching the bottom of the glass get a little bit more water in them. And that will be over a period of sort of 10 to 12 days, by which time they'll be acclimatized and they can then be potted. So that's all I need to do with those. Let's get them out of the way, so I don't keep knocking them and getting them out. Now we come back to the mother plant, and I remember this mother plant because this happened last year as well. This has got virtually no moss on it, absolutely nothing, and it's not hydrating properly. It's not getting enough moisture by just pouring water over those roots, and I did this last year as well, so I'm going to do it again because it worked well last year. What I'm actually going to do is add some moss around the base of this plant and tie it on, and then come the autumn time, when I start to dry this off ready to go into its winter rest, I can just take the moss off, because I won't want it in the winter. I don't want it staying wet in the winter. But it's something I did last year and it works quite well. What is difficult is getting it to stay there while I get a tie on. But we'll see what we can do. It's just literally to hold some moss in place, and it will help those roots hydrate, because the moss will obviously stay wet a lot longer than no moss at all, because that's what there is at the moment. As I said, I did this last year and it seemed to work quite well. The bulbs plumped up, and the plant grew on well with its new canes, which it has got some of. Oh, I did want to say there are two Keikis very near the base of the plant, and I'm actually going to leave them there because already one of them has attached a root. Yeah? They're close enough to the base to form part of the base. These are the new canes growing on. This is growing slower than the Keikis, but so be it. Right, let's get me tangle of fishing line out of the way and see if I can get some moss to stay there. What I'm going to do with this is put some moss on one side and do a couple of turns with the fishing line, and then turn the mount over and do the other side and do a couple more turns. As I said, this is not for aesthetics, this is simply to keep these roots moist longer than they are at the moment, which is just not long enough. If I mount it on moss, then eventually the moss will break down and I'll have to worry about getting the old moss off. By doing it this way, I don't have to worry about getting the old moss off, because it will fall off. What I'll have to do is untie it and it will just let go. I don't even have to get moss over the whole of the mount. It just needs to be in enough places to allow this to hydrate. So that's actually a fair old bit. It's mainly on the front of the mount, and now it'll all fall off while I try and pick my fishing line up. And yes, I know it would have been easier to tie the fishing line on first, but then the fishing line would have been up against the bare roots, because, you know, it's already on the mount, it's already attached. There is some logic in my madness. Not always. Sometimes the madness is far more dominant than the logic. Someone once said, "Oh, you've got to be mad to grow orchids well." I don't necessarily agree, but there may be a bit of sense in it. Right, yeah, let's just see if I can hold that in place while I loop this over. It's fiddly, but it's only a one-off. Fiddly though it is, it'll work. Gotcha. Right, that's looped over enough to be able to pull my slip knot tight enough to just hold some moss in place, and then we'll start turning and getting it to get a grip. So there's a bit tucked under my finger that just keeps wanting to fall off. Gotcha! Right, there we go. As I say, this doesn't have to be tight, it just has to sit there on those roots. Now, perhaps I can put a bit round the back too. The little bit that's left, not a lot, but just to get some more. Cover a few more roots, cover the tag. So I know what this one is, I'm not going to forget. It actually bloomed very well this year, this one, first time. There we go, that's it, that's all I want to do, is just put enough on there to keep those roots hydrated, because the moss will stay, when I water it and chuck water all over this, the moss will stay wet for at least half a day, and that's plenty long enough for the roots to totally absorb the moisture. As opposed to before, I was getting the roots wet and probably within 30 minutes they were dry. And at that point they haven't really taken enough in. And therein lies the problem. Okay, that's that done. Now that will now hydrate far, far better than it was before. A couple of dangly bits of moss that can be tucked in. There we go, that's that done. That's job number one done. I'll be back. Right, this is the other one I want to have a go at. This is the Brassia that's just gone out of bloom, and although there are no signs of brand new roots at the moment, as the brand new roots tend to come on this a bit later down the line as far as the growth pattern is concerned, it nonetheless has a lot of active root tips on the roots currently attached to the plant, and the plant is just getting too far away from its mount. It's starting to get unstable. So this is getting dealt with for exactly the same reason as the last plant got the moss added to it. It's not getting enough hydration through the aerial roots. Now the oldest part of the plant has actually got some moss on it, but chances are most of the roots on this oldest pseudo bulbs, there's two at the back there, a little tiny one as well, have probably gone now because they're too old. You know, they do regenerate their root system as they go along. So in effect, this is the biggest Keiki you've ever seen. In terminology, that's wrong, but nonetheless, treatment-wise, it is a giant Keiki. So let's see if it will come off. There's going to be some root damage on the oldest section of this plant. It's bound to be. Absolutely bound to be. Let's rescue me label. That's the original label on that one. I'd forgotten that's actually a primary cross. It's Arcuigira cross with Verrucosa. Verrucosa is a popular Brassia, has lovely blooms, mainly shades of green and purpley bits, but spidery nonsense nonetheless. There's going to be some horrible tearing sounds as these roots get yanked off the mount, but the roots that are on the mount in this case don't matter that much. Oh, don't you love that? And as I'm doing this, the bark is falling apart, so the bark's had its day. No. Yeah, it's just going anyway. So, 2 reasons for it coming off. Right. I've still actually got some reasonable, if a bit smelly, moss on it. This is probably going to have to go under the tap. Now, this is one of those cases where this bulb's loose. This is an old, not far off a seedling bulb. Notice the coloration at the base of that bulb. That's not a happy bulb. It's starting to rot. So I'm going to get my big cutters. I'll be back in a sec. Now, before you start moaning that I haven't sterilised my secateurs, they were put away sterilised, so they're coming out sterilised. I'm not sure about that bulb, but I am sure about those back 2. They're coming off, so I'm going to cut the rhizome there. It's quite a sturdy rhizome, this is. I wonder if I can tease those roots out first, because if I don't, they're going to get chopped. I don't think those are going to come out any sense. They're just too embedded in that root tangle. I don't know though, I might be able to separate them out. So there's 2 quite good strong roots heading back to it. They're from the front of the plant, but they've made their way to the back. They're probably good roots. They may even have root tips on. These older bits here I'm not so fussed about. So what have we got here? Is that a good root? No, it's not a bad root. I don't know whether it was worth the effort or not. This has got more than enough roots on it. Another one here heading off into the wilds. So that's not a bad root either. Well, that was worth saving those 2, because otherwise they'd have just got snipped at the point I'm going to cut. There we go. We have a clean rhizome. Why I was worried is the fact that that bulb's going. Yeah, and I seem to have found a pattern that if a plant's ever had fusarium, or has managed to get it, which I don't think I've ever had any that have got it in the grow room. They've either come in with it, and or they were given it by me, and that was my own stupid fault. I did an experiment for new people. You won't have seen it because it's quite a few years ago now. I tried growing in ceramis, the clay particles. Danny's used them in the past, other people have had a go with it, and it was a form of well, semi-hydro, I suppose, because I potted the plants up in the ceramis and then stood the pots in trays of water, so the bottom of the pots were permanently in water. And unfortunately a couple of the plants went into those trays with fusarium unknown by me, and that potentially gave that, being stood in a constant tray of the same water, potentially passed that on to the other plants. Don't know for certain, but an awful lot of those plants died, and some of them was with the obvious reason. Now, that's not a bad little plant to pot, but do I want that bulb? If I take it off, that leaves me with 2, so it's going to have to stay. But nonetheless, that's not a bad root system. Doesn't need cleaning up. Do you know what? Doesn't need any cut off either. Let's have a look at this older section. Do you know, I'm going to leave the lot. This has got now to do the same transition as I was talking about with the Keikis. It's these are aerial roots fundamentally, even though some of them were on the base and have actually come off quite reasonable. They're not really broken at all. But nonetheless, primarily this is an aerial root system, and the roots will need to acclimatise to going in some media. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I haven't got a pot that deep. I'd have to use a Cymbidium pot. Might end up having to just take that one off back here where the branches are. And some of the others might need to. It depends whether it will, see, it will bend. Well, if it'll bend, it can bend in round the pot. But these are fundamentally aerial roots. They will have to acclimatise. But the reason I'm not going to do the same as I did with the Keikis is that they are going in chunky bark, and that's all they're going to have. So they're going to have so much air around them that it won't actually matter, because obviously that, with the new Orchiata bark, it dries incredibly quick. So for a while they will actually be totally dry in between waterings, which is what they're used to, and the media won't stay wet for long. So they can acclimatise in their new pot without me worrying about them. So that really is all there is to do with this, is just get it in a pot. I've got quite a deep layer in the bottom because a lot of these roots are going to be sitting on it. So they are going to already be right down near the bottom of the pot. Let's see if I can get them all in, of course. Yeah, they're going to go in. Now I'm going to have to push this down, and there will be a few cracks in some of these roots. But if I don't get it down low in the pot, then it's not going to do its job. The idea is to get the oldest bulb back near the edge, leaving room for whatever's going to come out at the front of the plant here, which will be one new growth, maybe two. That remains to be seen. So a lot of the roots are sat on the bottom, and now I don't want a huge load of air gaps in here, so I'm going to feed this in a little bit at a time, making sure that as it stacks up it's not leaving any big gaps. The odd gap won't hurt. But Brassias are, they are epiphytes, they do grow on trees, but pictures and things I've seen of these growing in the wild, they're not acrobats. They do tend to anchor themselves on the tops of branches and in the forks. You don't very often see them growing on a trunk. They tend to grow on the tops of branches where they can be quite flat. Yeah? Because obviously they do grow into pretty large plants, and when they've actually got a spike on them, the spikes can be enormous and they have some weight to them. So obviously they're going to try and pull the plants away from their anchorage. So they tend to sit on the tops of the branches where they can get a really good hold and the roots can wrap around and get a good grip. You don't very often see these hanging off the sides of branches, and certainly very, very rarely do they appear on trunks. Have a look down the side every now and again. I've got a mass of roots in one place that's actually touching the side of the pot. Chances are that's where they're going to grow, given half the chance anyway. I don't want the base of the plant sat in the media, I want it sat on it. So I'm going to go down so far and then stop. And if there are a few roots very near the surface, that doesn't matter. If they branch out, they'll push down in. How are we doing here? Not bad round that side. A bit exposed round here. Top this up, tuck a few bits in underneath. I'm not going to bury these pseudo bulbs, I just want them sat at the surface, and any new roots that come out can go straight down in and get a good hold with any luck. I don't think I'm going to bother staking that because these roots are going to take off quite quickly. They will soon establish that plant. A bit of pressing down the side and make sure the roots are nicely held without cracking them and busting them. And as soon as you do that, there's always room for some more media. There we go. Now, if this should produce a growth either side, probably not, it's probably only going to produce one. The chances are the new growth is going to come out just here, and it's got all that space to go into. So that's all I need to do with that, and that hasn't been watered today, so that will now get a good soak. Because this is new Orchiata bark, it'll have quite a bit of dust in it. That should get that all washed off in one go, and then it can be allowed to totally dry, which it probably in this case will have done by the end of today. And then I'll have a look tomorrow and see how I'm doing, and if it looks bone dry tomorrow, I'll water it again. If there's still elements of moisture in the pot, I'll leave it. Certainly initially, I want this to be bone dry before I water it again, simply because the roots have to acclimatise. If this was a repot, that wouldn't be necessary, but it's not. It's got to acclimatise from aerial roots to roots in a pot. I don't see any, that's the only gap I've got there, but the roots are extending off. If I try and push media down into there, I'll probably break some of those. I'll give it a go. Now I can see them bending. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. So there we go, that's that one done. Giant Keiki. Well, technically it is, isn't it? You know, it's a plant with aerial roots that's now going in a pot. And it looks like that was a good time to do that, because those two older bulbs don't look too clever. They're not soggy, although the base of that one is starting to go a bit soggy. But at least the rhizome was clean. No bright colours showing. So that's a bonus. And the mount had its day anyway. It's just falling apart. Yeah, so good time to take it off. Right, that's that little kitchen session done. I have got some more things to do in the kitchen, but they're not related. These two things had a relationship between them with what I was doing. The other jobs I've got to do in the kitchen are just totally different plants, different sort of things that are going on, so I'm going to leave that as a separate video, which may or may not get filmed today. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for dropping by. I won't say that's something different, but if you're relatively new to the channel, it could be. Always remember, if you run a channel, not everybody's been around for 4 or 5 years watching all your videos. Some of them may have only just joined you and never seen you repot a plant. Because they're not, you know, I mean, most people have not got the sort of time to go back and watch all your old videos. And quite honestly, some of my older ones I'd prefer people didn't watch. Because concepts have changed, ideas have changed over time. So something that I might have done 3 years ago, I wouldn't dream of doing nowadays, because I've learned things since then. So the newer videos have got my most up-to-date information and knowledge that I've gained. So they are probably a bit more useful than some of the older ones when I was new to doing videos. So, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.